It was supposed to be a light-hearted afternoon. Jinkee Pacquiao had arrived at a community boxing gym for a charity event, smiling warmly as she greeted the crowd. Cameras flashed, children ran around with excitement, and people cheered to see the wife of the legendary Manny Pacquiao supporting grassroots sports. Jinky was known for her elegance, humility, and generosity, and not for stepping into the ring. She was there to inspire young athletes and encourage them to chase their dreams. But among the cheers and laughter lurked someone with a very different agenda. A young local boxer, brimming with arrogance, pushed his way to the front. He was strong, muscular, and loud, and he made sure everyone was watching. With a smirk plastered across his face, he raised his voice so the entire gym could hear. "Why are you here, Mrs. Pacquiao? You don't belong in a boxing gym. You're just a politician's wife who enjoys the spotlight. Do you even know what it feels like to fight?" The crowd fell silent. A wave of discomfort swept through the room. People exchanged uneasy glances, some shocked, others embarrassed at his disrespect. But the boxer wasn't done. "If you really want to prove you care about boxing," he sneered, "why don't you get in the ring? Let's see what you've got. Or are you scared?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Was he seriously challenging Jinky? The arrogance was shocking. A few onlookers chuckled nervously, whispering that it must be a joke. Others shook their heads in disgust, offended by the humiliation he was trying to inflict. Jinky stood poised, her face calm. She hadn't expected this, not today, not here. Her eyes flicked toward the children in the audience, then back to the arrogant young man. She could feel the weight of everyone's gaze pressing down on her. Her instinct told her to smile politely and walk away, to ignore the provocation. But something inside her refused to let the disrespect go unanswered. She knew he wasn't just mocking her. He was mocking every woman who had ever been underestimated. The crowd leaned in, waiting, and then came the moment that would change everything. What Jinky did next left the entire crowd stunned. The room buzzed with uneasy silence after the arrogant challenge. Children who moments earlier had been laughing now clutched their parents' hands. Coaches at the gym exchanged looks, unsure if they should intervene. The boxer, however, relished the attention. He puffed out his chest, smirk widening as he stepped closer to Jinky, circling her like a predator toying with prey. "You see?" he boomed, pointing at her as though she were on trial. "She won't even answer. All she knows is to dress pretty and smile for the cameras. She's not like Manny, she's nothing." The words sliced through the air, dripping with arrogance. A few in the crowd gasped in disbelief. Some even tried to hush him, whispering, "Show some respect. That's Senator Pacquiao's wife." But the young man shrugged them off, his ego swelling with every second. Jinky remained still. Her posture was straight, her chin lifted, her eyes locked calmly on him. She didn't flinch, didn't lash out. Her silence was not weakness, and it was composure. Yet her refusal to engage only fueled his arrogance. "What's wrong? Afraid?" he taunted, taking a step closer. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you." "I wouldn't want people to say I embarrassed the Pacquiao name too badly." Laughter erupted from a handful of his supporters, their cackles echoing off the gym walls. But most of the audience shifted uncomfortably, many raising their phones to record. They knew something bigger was unfolding. Jinky took a deep breath. She had spent years watching her husband train. The discipline, the sacrifices, the respect boxing required. And now here was a man stripping that respect away. Not just from her, but from the very sport he claimed to honor. She finally spoke, her voice steady but firm. "You think boxing is about humiliating others? No, boxing is about discipline, heart, and respect. If you truly understood it, you wouldn't act this way." The gym quieted. The young man blinked, startled for a moment by her composure, but his pride would not allow him to back down. "Oh, spare me the speeches," he sneered. "You talk like you know something about the ring. But I say you prove it, right here, right now, unless you're just all words." His words echoed like a slap. Cameras zoomed in. People whispered anxiously, "She won't really do it." "Will she?" Jinky's heart raced. A part of her wanted to walk away, to keep her dignity by refusing to entertain a bully. But she also thought of the young girls in the audience watching closely, waiting to see how she would respond to being disrespected in front of everyone. If she turned away, the lesson would be that arrogance wins. If she stood firm, she could show something far greater than strength. She could show courage. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor like a declaration of intent. The crowd gasped. "I didn't come here to fight," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the gym. "But if you think humiliating me proves your worth, then fine. I'll step into the ring, not to show off, but to remind you and everyone here what real strength looks like." The gym exploded with noise. Some cheered in shock, others shouted warnings, and many scrambled to capture the moment on their phones. The arrogant boxer threw his head back and laughed, convinced he had already won. "Perfect," he barked. "I'll make this quick." But while he saw a chance to glorify himself, the crowd began to shift. Murmurs spread, "She's really brave. She's doing this to make a point." The tension thickened as Jinky removed her jacket and handed it to a volunteer. She wasn't dressed for combat, yet her posture radiated determination. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with the boxer's arrogance, and that contrast alone began to turn the crowd against him. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He masked it quickly with another smirk, but deep down he hadn't expected her to accept. And then, just as the two prepared to step into the ring, a voice from the crowd rang out, "Don't underestimate her. She's Pacquiao's wife, and she's stronger than you think." The boxer scoffed, waving the comment away. But as Jinky climbed between the ropes, the atmosphere shifted completely. This was no longer about a woman being mocked. It was about respect. What would you do if you were in Jinky's position? Walk away or step up? Comment below where you're watching this from. The gym floor trembled beneath the roar of voices. Whispers spread like wildfire, a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Jinkee Pacquiao, the elegant, soft-spoken wife of the legendary Manny Pacquiao, had accepted the arrogant boxer's public challenge. Parents pulled their children closer, worried about what might happen next. Some shook their heads, muttering that this had gone too far. Others, however, leaned forward eagerly, phones in hand, ready to capture history. The young boxer's smirk widened as Jinky stepped through the ropes. He strutted around the ring, throwing mock jabs into the air, each movement dripping with arrogance. "Look at this," he shouted to the crowd. "This will be over in seconds. Remember this moment, because you'll never see anything like it again." Laughter trickled from a small group of his friends, but the rest of the audience remained hushed. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching Jinky. She removed her earrings and handed them carefully to a volunteer. She tied her hair back with slow precision, every movement deliberate, controlled. Though her heart pounded inside her chest, her face remained calm, her eyes unshaken. She had been underestimated her entire life, for being a woman, for being a wife, for being just Jinky. But this was her moment to prove that true strength didn't always look like muscles or fists. The referee, clearly uncomfortable, tried to intervene. "Ma'am, maybe this isn't such a good idea." But Jinky raised her hand politely, silencing him. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to stand up for myself." "That's enough." The crowd fell completely silent. The arrogant boxer rolled his eyes, bouncing on his toes. Fine. Let's get this over with." He lunged forward suddenly, throwing a playful jab meant to embarrass her. But Jinky didn't flinch. She sidestepped gracefully, her movements sharper than anyone expected. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The boxer paused, blinking. "Beginner's luck," he scoffed, charging again with a quick combination. But once more Jinky dodged, her years of watching Manny's training paying off in instinctive footwork. The gym erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in disbelief. The boxer's cocky smile faltered for the first time. From the sidelines, a young girl clapped her hands excitedly. "Go, Jinky," she squealed, her voice piercing through the tension. The crowd laughed nervously, but it only fueled Jinky's resolve. She remembered all those nights sitting quietly as Manny trained, studying his stance, his balance, the way he used patience to control the ring. She wasn't a fighter, but she understood one of boxing's greatest secrets. Sometimes composure was stronger than power. The boxer, now irritated, barked at her. "Stand still! Stop running!" His voice cracked with frustration. He swung harder, faster, his movements growing reckless. Jinky ducked under one wild swing and straightened, her eyes steady. For the first time, she spoke inside the ring. "You want to humiliate me? You're only humiliating yourself." The words hit harder than any punch. The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy shifting entirely to her side. What began as nervous sympathy was turning into roaring support. The boxer's face reddened. His pride, once his greatest weapon, was now a burden. He had thought this would be an easy victory, a chance to mock the Pacquiao name. Instead, he was being exposed, not by punches but by his own arrogance. Still, he refused to quit. With a roar, he charged again, swinging with all his might. Jinky lifted her hands defensively, catching the brunt of the blow on her arms. The impact stung, but she stood her ground. The crowd gasped, bracing for her to crumble, but she didn't. She held firm. Her calmness was more devastating than any strike. The boxer staggered back, panting, his shoulders heaving. He looked around, suddenly realizing the crowd was no longer with him. Every camera was pointed not at his bravado, but at her dignity. In that moment, Jinky felt something shift inside her. She was no longer standing there as Manny's wife. She was standing there as herself, as a woman proving that respect could never be demanded through intimidation, only earned through courage. The referee finally stepped in, raising his hands. "That's enough. This is over." The boxer, sweating and humiliated, tried to argue. "No, I can still..." But the crowd drowned him out with cheers for Jinky. Children jumped up and down. Women clapped furiously. Men shouted her name. The energy was electric, filling the gym like thunder. Jinky lowered her hands slowly, her breathing controlled. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply looked at the boxer and said, "Respect. That's all anyone asks for. Learn it." The arrogant boxer turned away, his face burning with shame. For the first time, his arrogance had no place to hide. The moment had ended, but everyone in the gym knew this story was just beginning. The whispers began spreading. "Did you see that? That's Jinkee Pacquiao, Manny's wife," and she just humbled him without even throwing a punch. The gym was still buzzing from the confrontation. The arrogant boxer paced in his corner, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. His eyes darted toward the crowd, searching desperately for a shred of support. But the cheers, the applause, the shouts of encouragement, none of them were for him anymore, they were for her. Jinkee Pacquiao stood calmly in the ring, her posture unshaken, her face serene. She hadn't thrown a single punch. She hadn't mocked him, shouted at him, or lost control. Yet somehow she had stripped him of the very thing he prized most, his pride. And that's when the whispers began. "Wait, isn't that Jinkee Pacquiao?" A woman near the front asked, lowering her phone as realization struck. "Yes, that's Manny's wife," another replied, eyes widening. "She's the senator's wife, the first lady of Philippine boxing." The murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. Strangers tugged on each other's sleeves, whispering, pointing, lifting their phones higher. "That's Jinkee Pacquiao, the wife of the champion himself. She just stood up to him without fear." The arrogant boxer's face drained of color as he caught fragments of the chatter. His smirk, once so confident, now looked like a mask slipping away. He had challenged her, thinking she was just another woman he could push around. He hadn't realized he had disrespected the wife of a living legend, and worse, that she had exposed his arrogance with nothing but calm dignity. The camera zoomed in. Live streams lit up. Comment sections exploded. "No way, that's Jinkee Pacquiao in the ring. She just humbled that guy without even fighting back. This is going viral." Respect to her courage. The gym, once divided, was now united, not in fear of the boxer's power, but in admiration of Jinky's strength. Still, the young man tried to salvage his pride. He raised his gloves, bouncing on his toes, shouting, "Don't listen to them. This isn't over. I'll show you who's the real fighter." But his voice cracked under the weight of the crowd's disapproval. The cheers for Jinky only grew louder, drowning out his desperate cries. Jinky turned her head slowly, looking at the audience. She saw young girls with wide eyes, women nodding proudly, men clapping with respect. She had become more than just Manny's wife in that moment. She had become a symbol of composure, of dignity, of quiet strength in the face of humiliation. She raised one hand gently, not in victory but in peace. The crowd immediately hushed, waiting for her words. "I didn't come here to fight," she said, her voice steady, carrying to the back of the gym. "I came here to support this sport, to encourage young people. But sometimes life will test you in ways you don't expect. And when that happens, you don't need anger. You need courage." The gym erupted again, this time with thunderous applause. Her words hit deeper than any punch could. The arrogant boxer's face twisted with frustration. He stomped his foot like a child denied attention. "Stop talking like you're some kind of hero. You didn't even land a hit." But his protest only made things worse. "Exactly. Someone shouted from the crowd. She didn't need to. Laughter rippled across the gym, but it wasn't mocking Jinky. It was mocking him. The once cocky fighter was now the butt of the joke, his bravado exposed as hollow. At that moment, an older coach stepped forward from the sidelines. His voice was firm, his expression disappointed. Son, boxing isn't about mocking women. It's not about bullying. It's about honor, respect, and discipline. And right now you're showing none of that. The boxer's shoulders slumped. His arrogance had left him defenseless, not against fists, but against truth. Meanwhile, Jinky remained calm. She didn't gloat, didn't revel in his embarrassment. She simply lowered her gaze, then looked back at the crowd. "This isn't about me," she said gently. "It's about what we choose to do when others try to put us down. Do we let them? Or do we stand up even if our voice shakes?" The audience roared in agreement. The noise was deafening, filling the gym with a wave of support that lifted her higher than any title belt ever could. The boxer stood frozen, trapped in the storm of his own arrogance unraveling before him. For the first time he looked small, not because of his size, but because of the emptiness of his pride. And then, the most devastating realization of all swept through the room. If she could humble him without throwing a single punch, what would Manny Pacquiao himself think if he were here to see it? The whispers grew louder. Imagine what Manny would do to him. He's lucky it was Jinky, not the champ. But honestly, she didn't even need Manny. She handled it herself. The arrogant boxer's jaw tightened. He tried to raise his voice again, but no one was listening anymore. The crowd had already chosen their hero, and it wasn't him. With the crowd on her side and the arrogant boxer desperate to regain control, Jinky prepared to deliver the most powerful lesson yet, one that would silence the entire gym once and for all. The gym's energy shifted like a storm changing direction. The arrogant boxer, once drunk with confidence, now stood cornered by the weight of his own pride. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes flickering with a mixture of rage and desperation. He had walked into the ring expecting to humiliate Jinkee Pacquiao. Instead, he had become the one humiliated. But arrogance dies hard. "No," he shouted, stomping his foot against the mat. "This isn't finished. I'm not done." His fist shook at his sides as though sheer anger could restore the control he had lost. The crowd booed. Their voices thundered through the gym, a chorus of disapproval that rattled him more than any punch could. Yet still he clung to his fragile pride. "You think you've won?" He sneered at Jinky, sweat dripping down his face. "You think just standing there makes you strong? Prove it." "Hit me, come on! Show them you can fight!" He pounded his chest, beckoning her forward. "I dare you." But Jinky didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hands lowered, her breathing steady. Her silence unnerved him more than any attack. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. And then Jinky spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It cut through the noise of the crowd and pierced straight into the boxer's chest. "Strength isn't about how hard you hit," she said. "It's about how much respect you carry, for yourself and for others." The audience erupted into applause. Her words echoed like thunder, drowning out his arrogance. The boxer shook his head, trying to mask the unease twisting in his gut. "Respect? Respect doesn't win fights," he shouted back, though his voice cracked under the pressure. Jinky's eyes softened, but her tone grew firmer. "Respect wins life. Without it, you're nothing but noise, and today all you've shown is noise." The gym fell silent for a beat. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The boxer's face contorted with fury. He lunged forward, throwing a wild punch, not to hurt her but to intimidate, to force her into fear. Gasps echoed through the crowd, but Jinky didn't flinch. She raised her arm, blocked the punch on instinct, and stepped back with calm precision. The movement was simple, almost graceful, but it sent shockwaves through the gym. The crowd erupted. Phones captured the moment in flashes of light. The arrogant boxer staggered back, staring at her as though he had just seen a ghost. "How?" he stammered. Jinky lowered her hands again, her eyes steady. "Do you see? You can't control me. Not with your words, not with your fists, because real strength doesn't bow to arrogance." The audience roared with approval, the sound shaking the walls. Strangers shouted her name. Women cheered through tears. Even hardened trainers nodded with respect. The boxer tried to speak, but the noise swallowed his words. He pounded his fists against his thighs, his face red with humiliation. For the first time, he realized there was no victory left to take. Still, Jinky wasn't finished. She took a step forward, closing the space between them. Her presence, calm yet commanding, forced him to shrink back despite his size. "You came here to humiliate me," she said, her voice unwavering. "But what you really did was reveal yourself. You wanted to show strength, but all you showed was weakness. You wanted to make me small, but all you did was expose how small you truly are." The words struck him harder than any blow. His lips parted as though to protest, but no sound came out. The crowd roared even louder, their cheers shaking the very air. Jinky turned to the audience, raising her voice now so all could hear. "This isn't about me. This is about every person who has ever been mocked, underestimated, or told they don't belong. Strength isn't about fists. It's about dignity. And no one can take that from you, unless you let them." The audience leapt to their feet. The gym exploded into applause, cheers, and chants of her name. "Jinky! Jinky! Jinky!" The sound was deafening. The arrogant boxer's shoulders sagged. His fists lowered. He stood surrounded not by glory but by shame. He had lost, not in a fight but in front of everyone. His pride lay shattered at his feet. Meanwhile, Jinky remained composed. She didn't gloat, didn't smile with triumph. She simply looked at him one last time and said softly, "Remember this moment. Let it change you." And then she stepped back, leaving him standing alone in the center of the ring, exposed, humbled, forgotten. The crowd surged toward her as she exited, showering her with applause, respect, and admiration. Children stretched out their hands to touch hers. Women clapped with tears streaming down their cheeks. Men nodded with admiration usually reserved for champions. And in that moment, the message was clear. She hadn't needed to throw a punch. Her voice, her composure, and her unshakable dignity had landed the most devastating blow of all. But just when the boxer thought the humiliation couldn't get any worse, the truth about Jinkee Pacquiao's identity came crashing down, and the entire gym fell silent. The gym was still vibrating with cheers when Jinky stepped back toward the ropes. Her calm presence radiated strength, and the crowd clung to her every move. The arrogant boxer, however, stood frozen in the center of the ring, fists limp at his sides. His arrogance had collapsed, leaving only the raw sting of humiliation. And then came the whispers again, this time louder, clearer, and impossible to ignore. "That's Jinkee Pacquiao." "Wait, you don't know? That's Manny Pacquiao's wife. She's not just a politician's wife, she's practically boxing royalty." The arrogant boxer's head jerked toward the crowd, his eyes wide. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice cracking. A man near the front, phone raised high, shouted over the noise, "You just tried to humiliate the wife of the world champion. The people's champ, Manny Pacquiao." The crowd erupted again, this time louder than ever. Chants of "Manny! Manny! Manny!" thundered across the gym, echoing through every corner. Some cheered for the legend himself, while others clapped furiously for the woman who had just defended his name with more dignity than any punch could deliver. The boxer staggered back, his face draining of color. His arrogance had blinded him. He hadn't realized who he was dealing with. He hadn't realized that by mocking her, he wasn't just disrespecting Jinky. He was disrespecting an entire legacy. Phones streamed live across social media, the comments flooding in faster than anyone could read. "This fool just disrespected Jinkee Pacquiao and got humbled. She's the wife of a champion and a senator. How dare he? This video's going viral. The whole world needs to see this." The arrogant boxer's friends shrank into the background, their laughter gone. Even they couldn't deny the truth. Their hero had just made himself a villain. Meanwhile, Jinky remained composed. She raised her hand again, signaling the crowd to quiet down. Slowly, the cheers dimmed into silence, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of cameras recording. She turned to the boxer, her eyes calm but piercing. "You didn't know who I was," she said softly. "But that doesn't matter. Because whether I'm Jinkee Pacquiao or just another woman in this crowd, you still had no right to treat me that way." The words hit him like a hammer. He lowered his gaze, ashamed. Jinky continued, her voice steady and powerful. "Respect should not depend on someone's name or their status or their fame. Respect should be given to everyone. You wanted to embarrass me. Instead, you embarrassed yourself." The audience exploded with applause, many rising to their feet. Trainers pounded the ring apron, clapping furiously. Mothers lifted their children higher so they could see the woman who had just spoken truth to arrogance. The arrogant boxer shook his head, trying to muster an excuse, but the words caught in his throat. No explanation could erase what had just happened. At that moment, another figure pushed through the crowd, an older police officer who had been working security for the event. He stepped up to the ropes, glaring at the young man. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" the officer barked. "You tried to bully the wife of one of the greatest fighters in history, and she still showed you more respect than you deserved." The boxer's jaw clenched. His pride was shattered, but now his reputation was crumbling too. Everywhere he turned, phones recorded his downfall, immortalizing his humiliation for the world to see. The chants rose again, but this time they were different. Not Manny, but Jinky. "Jinky, Jinky!" The sound rattled the young man's bones. The same crowd he had hoped would cheer his name now lifted hers to the heavens. Jinky, however, didn't bask in the chants. She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging the crowd with humility. Then she turned back to the boxer one last time. "You wanted to prove your strength," she said quietly, "but strength isn't found in fists. It's found in humility, and until you learn that, you'll never be a true fighter." The crowd roared, the gym shaking with applause. Tears streamed down the faces of some women in the audience. Young athletes stared in awe, realizing they had just witnessed something greater than a match. They had witnessed a lesson. The arrogant boxer sank to his knees, covering his face with his gloves. The humiliation was complete. He had entered the ring to dominate, but he left it humbled, overshadowed, and forgotten. Meanwhile, Jinky stepped gracefully out of the ropes, greeted by a wave of applause and cheers that followed her every step. She didn't need to fight. She didn't need to win with punches. She had already won, with dignity, composure, and truth. And as the cameras followed her out, the world prepared to witness the story that was about to explode across social media. Within hours, the video would spread worldwide. Millions would see how Jinkee Pacquiao silenced arrogance with dignity, and the arrogant boxer would face consequences he never imagined. By the time Jinkee Pacquiao stepped out of the gym, the moment was already immortalized. Dozens of cameras had captured every second of the confrontation. Every word, every look, every moment when arrogance crumbled under the weight of dignity. Within minutes, clips were flying across Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. The title appeared again and again. Arrogant boxer tries to humiliate Jinkee Pacquiao, instantly regrets it. She didn't throw a punch, but she won the fight. Millions clicked. Millions watched. And millions felt the same rush of pride, anger, and inspiration. At first, the comments sections lit up with disbelief. Is that really Jinkee Pacquiao? No way she handled it like that, and so much class. This is why she's a queen. Pure respect. Then came the tidal wave of admiration. Viewers from across the globe praised her strength and composure. Women called her an inspiration. Men applauded her courage. Children replayed her words, quoting them in captions. Strength isn't about fists. It's about dignity. By the next morning, the video had gone viral worldwide. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Headlines praised her poise. Meanwhile, the arrogant boxer's name was dragged through the mud. He had dreamed of fame, but not like this. Memes mocked his red face and broken pride. Journalists criticized his lack of sportsmanship. Sponsors quietly cut ties. Even his own trainers distanced themselves, embarrassed by his actions. In one interview, a veteran coach summed it up. He stepped into the ring thinking he'd expose her. Instead, she exposed him, and she didn't need a single punch. The boxer issued a public apology days later, but the damage was done. His arrogance had written his downfall. His name would forever be attached to humiliation, not triumph. Jinky, on the other hand, rose higher than ever. But not because she sought glory. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate his downfall. Instead, she used the spotlight to spread a message. At a press conference, reporters pressed her for details. "Why didn't you walk away?" one asked. "Why did you step into the ring at all?" Her answer was simple yet powerful. "I didn't fight to prove myself. I fought to prove a point." Too often, people are judged, mocked, or underestimated, not for who they are, but for who others think they are. I wanted to show that dignity and respect are stronger than arrogance and pride. That's all. The room fell silent. Cameras clicked. And across the world, millions nodded in agreement. Young athletes began quoting her words in training gyms. Women shared the video with captions like, "This is what strength looks like." Even men who had once laughed at the idea of her stepping into a ring admitted they were wrong. She didn't just defend herself, one commentator wrote. She defended the idea that respect belongs to everyone, no matter their gender, status, or strength. The incident sparked bigger conversations. In classrooms, teachers used it as an example of standing up to bullies. On talk shows, experts discussed how dignity could defeat intimidation. On social media, the hashtag #RespectLikeJinky trended for days. But for Jinky, the victory wasn't about fame or trending hashtags. It was about the faces she saw that day in the gym. The children watching, the women who smiled through tears, the men who realized arrogance had no place in true strength. That was the real win. Manny Pacquiao, away on official business when the incident happened, later praised his wife publicly. In an interview, he smiled proudly. She didn't just carry the Pacquiao name. She carried herself with courage and grace. That's harder than any championship belt. The clip of Manny's words went viral too, cementing the story as one of the most powerful moments in recent memory. And as the dust settled, the arrogant boxer faded into silence. His lesson had been learned the hardest way possible. But the world didn't remember him.